The rain came down hard and fast, and the man on the library steps was shaking so badly that Elena Marsh almost walked past him without stopping. It was nearly 9 at night. The streets were empty, and every store on Miller Avenue had already pulled down its shutters. She had just locked the heavy front doors of the Ashford Public Library and was pulling her coat tight against the wind when she saw him folded into the corner of the stone steps, his knees pulled to his chest, his dark hair soaked flat against his forehead. Something in her chest tightened. She knew she should keep walking. A grown woman alone at night, a stranger she had never seen before, and a town that had taught her more than once that kindness could be taken advantage of. But there was something about the way he sat there, so still, so quiet, like a man who had given up expecting anyone to notice him. "Sir," she said, stepping closer, "are you all right?" He lifted his head slowly. His eyes were dark and tired, but sharp, the kind of eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. For a moment, he said nothing, only studied her face, as if trying to decide whether she was real. "I'm fine," he said finally, his voice low and rough, "just resting." Elena glanced at the empty street behind her, then back at him. He did not look like the men who usually slept near the bus station. His clothes, though wet and wrinkled, were expensive. His shoes, though muddy, were leather, the kind that cost more than she made in a month. But his hands trembled, and his lips had gone pale from the cold, and none of that fit with anything else about him. "You don't look fine," she said gently. "Have you eaten today?" He hesitated, and that hesitation told her everything. She reached into her bag without waiting for an answer, and pulled out the small paper bag she had packed that morning. Inside was half a turkey sandwich, the other half already eaten hours ago during her lunch break. It was not much. It was, in fact, the only food she had left until her next paycheck arrived in 4 days, but she held it out to him anyway. "Here," she said. "It's not fancy, but it's food." He looked at the sandwich, then at her, and something shifted in his expression, something she could not quite name. Confusion, maybe, or disbelief, as if no one had offered him something so small, so ordinary, in a very long time. "You don't have to do that," he said quietly. "I know I don't have to," Elena said, smiling, despite the cold rain soaking through her coat. "That's kind of the point." Slowly, almost carefully, he took the bag from her hands. Their fingers brushed for a brief second, and she felt the coldness of his skin, colder than the rain should have made anyone. He unwrapped the sandwich and ate it in silence, and Elena stood there beside him, not because she needed to, but because leaving him alone in the rain felt wrong. "What's your name?" she asked after a while. He looked up at her, considering the question longer than it deserved. "Nico," he said at last. "Just Nico?" "For tonight," he said. "Just Nico is enough." She did not push further. She had learned, working at the library for 6 years, that some people needed to be handled gently, like old books with fragile spines. You did not force them open. You waited until they were ready to be read. "I'm Elena," she said. "I work here, at the library." "I know," he said. "I watched you close up. You checked every door twice." The comment startled her, but she brushed it aside as the odd thing a tired stranger might say. "Habit," she said. "Mr. Bennett, the manager, would have my head if something went missing." For the first time, something like a smile crossed his face, small and fleeting, but real. "That's a good habit to have," he said, "being careful with things that matter." They sat there a few more minutes, the rain slowing to a drizzle, the streetlights flickering against the wet pavement. Elena found herself talking, filling the silence the way she always did when nervous, telling him about the library, about the leaking roof in the children's section, about how her mother used to bring her here every Saturday when she was small. He listened. He did not interrupt once, and when she finally said she needed to catch the last bus home, he stood up with her, taller than she had expected, his presence suddenly filling the narrow street in a way that made her stomach flutter with something she could not name. "Thank you, Elena," he said, and the way he said her name made it sound important, like something worth remembering. "You didn't have to share what little you had. Most people wouldn't have. Most people haven't been where you've been," she said simply. "I hope you find somewhere warm tonight." He nodded, and for a moment, It looked as though he wanted to say something else, something bigger than a simple goodbye, but instead he only said, "Get home safe," and turned, walking into the dark in the opposite direction of the bus stop. Elena watched him go until the rain and the shadows swallowed him whole. Then she hurried to catch her bus, her mind still turning over the strange encounter, the stranger with the tired eyes and the expensive shoes, and the voice that carried more weight than it should have. By the time she reached her small apartment above the shoe repair shop, she had already begun to convince herself it was nothing, just a moment of kindness between two strangers who would likely never cross paths again. She was wrong. The next morning, Elena arrived at the library earlier than usual, her stomach growling from having given away her dinner the night before. She busied herself shelving returned books, chatting with the regulars, helping an elderly man find a mystery novel he had been searching for weeks. Grace Bennett, her closest friend and coworker, noticed the tired circles under her eyes almost immediately. "You look like you didn't sleep," Grace said, setting a cup of coffee on the front desk beside her. "Long night," Elena admitted, wrapping her hands around the warm cup gratefully. "Met someone strange outside, actually. A man, sitting on the steps in the rain, looked half frozen." Grace raised an eyebrow. "Did you call someone? The police, maybe?" "He didn't seem dangerous," Elena said. "Just tired. Lost, almost. I gave him half my sandwich." "Elena." Grace shook her head, half amused, half exasperated. "You gave away your food again? You barely have enough as it is." "He needed it more than I did," Elena said simply, and Grace, who had known her long enough not to argue when her mind was made up, only sighed and let the subject drop. The day passed as most days did, quiet and steady, filled with the comforting rhythm of returning books to their shelves, helping children find picture books, listening to Mr. Bennett complain about the budget cuts that always threatened to shrink the library's hours. Elena loved her work despite the low pay, despite the long shifts, despite the fact that some months she had to choose between paying her electric bill and buying groceries. There was something about being surrounded by stories, by the quiet company of thousands of books, that made even the hardest days feel bearable. It was 3 days later, on a bright afternoon, when golden light spilled through the library's tall windows, that the first gift arrived. A young delivery boy walked in carrying a large white box tied with a green ribbon, asking for someone named Elena Marsh. Confused, she signed for it, assuming there had been some kind of mistake, but when she opened it at the front desk, Grace peering over her shoulder in curiosity, she found a soft wool coat inside, dark green, clearly expensive, exactly her size. There was no note, no name. Nothing except the coat, folded neatly in tissue paper. "Who would send you something like this?" Grace asked, running her fingers over the fabric. Elena had no answer. She thought immediately of Nico, of the rain-soaked stranger on the library steps, but dismissed the idea just as quickly. He had not asked her last name. He had not known where she lived or worked beyond what she had told him in passing. It seemed impossible that a man she barely knew, a man who had seemed to have nothing, could afford something like this. And yet, 2 days after that, a second package arrived, this time containing a small leather-bound journal, the kind with thick cream pages and a soft cover, along with a fountain pen that looked far too elegant for someone like her. Again, no note. Again, no explanation. By the third gift, a beautifully wrapped box of tea from a shop Elena had never even heard of, she stopped pretending she did not know who was behind it. "It has to be him," she told Grace during their lunch break, sitting on the library's back steps where she had shared her sandwich with the stranger just a week before. "The man from the rain, Nico." "You said he looked homeless," Grace said, frowning. "How could he afford any of this?" "I don't know," Elena admitted. "None of it makes sense." She did not have to wonder for long. That evening, as she was locking up the library for the night, she saw him standing across the street, leaning against a sleek black car that looked entirely out of place on their modest little road. He was dressed differently now, in a tailored dark coat and polished shoes, his hair neatly combed, his posture straighter, more confident. He looked, Elena realized with a jolt, like an entirely different person from the shivering man she had met on the steps. "Nico?" she said, crossing the street slowly, unsure if her eyes were playing tricks on her. He smiled, and it was the same small, careful smile she remembered, even if everything else about him seemed to have changed. I wanted to thank you properly, he said, for what you did. The gifts, Elena said. That was you. A small thing, he said. You gave me the only food you had. I wanted to give something back. You didn't have to do all that, Elena said, though secretly the coat had already become her favorite thing she owned. A thank you would have been enough. Maybe, Nico said, but I don't often get the chance to properly repay kindness. I'd like to take you to dinner, if you'll allow it. Nothing more than that. Just a meal, and a chance to say thank you the right way. Elena studied him carefully, taking in the expensive car, the confident way he held himself now, so different from the broken man in the rain. Every instinct told her something did not add up, that there was a story here she did not yet understand. But there was also something in his eyes, something honest and grateful, that made her want to trust him, despite the unanswered questions. All right, she said finally. Dinner. But you're going to tell me what's going on, where you got all this money, why you looked the way you did that night. Fair enough, Nico said, opening the car door for her with a small, respectful nod. I promise you'll have your answers. As Elena settled into the soft leather seat, the scent of expensive cologne and fresh rain still lingering faintly in the air, she felt a small flutter of nerves mixed with excitement. She had no way of knowing that this dinner, this simple act of curiosity and kindness, was about to unravel into something far bigger than she could have imagined, something that would test everything she believed about safety, about trust, and about the kind of person she thought she was. The restaurant Nico took her to was unlike anything Elena had ever seen. Soft golden lights hung from the ceiling, and the tables were spaced far apart, giving each guest a sense of quiet privacy. The moment they walked in, the host greeted Nico by name, his tone respectful, almost careful, the way someone speaks to a person they are slightly afraid of. Elena noticed it immediately, the way the waitstaff seemed to move a little faster around him, the way conversations at nearby tables dropped just slightly when he passed. You come here often? She asked once they were seated. Often enough, Nico said, unfolding his napkin. It's quiet. I like quiet. Everyone here seems to know you. I know a lot of people, he said simply, and something in his tone told her not to push further, at least not yet. They talked through dinner about lighter things, her love for books, his surprising knowledge of poetry, the strange coincidence that had brought them together in the rain. Elena found herself laughing more than she expected, forgetting for long stretches of time the questions that had brought her here in the first place. But as the evening wound down, as the plates were cleared and the candles burned low, she finally asked the question that had been sitting heavy in her chest all night. Nico, she said carefully, why were you sitting outside my library that night? A man with all this, she gestured vaguely at their surroundings, doesn't end up soaked and shaking on a library step for no reason. He was quiet for a long moment, turning his glass slowly between his fingers. When he finally looked up at her, his expression had changed, the easy warmth replaced by something more guarded, more careful. There are parts of my life, he said slowly, that are complicated, parts I'm not proud of. That night, I needed to disappear for a while, to be no one, just a man on some steps, in the rain, with nothing. He paused. You didn't ask who I was. You didn't ask what I had. You just saw someone who was cold and hungry, and you helped. That still doesn't tell me what you do, Elena said gently, or why people look at you the way they do. Nico's jaw tightened slightly, and for a moment, Elena thought he might change the subject entirely. Instead, he set his glass down and met her eyes directly. My family has businesses, he said carefully, old businesses, complicated ones. I inherited responsibilities I didn't necessarily choose, and people respect those responsibilities, sometimes out of admiration, sometimes out of fear. He hesitated. It's not something I can fully explain over dinner, Elena, but I want you to know that whatever you've heard, whatever you might one day hear, that night on the steps was real. You didn't help a powerful man. You helped someone who, for a moment, had nothing at all. Elena sat back slowly, absorbing his words, feeling the weight beneath them even though he had told her almost nothing concrete. She was not foolish. She understood, in the vague shape of his explanation, that there were dangerous things hiding beneath his careful words. But she also remembered the trembling of his hands in the rain, the genuine gratitude in his eyes when she had handed him half a sandwich, the quiet loneliness that had radiated off him like heat from a fading fire. "Thank you for being honest," she said finally, "even if it's not the whole truth." "It's more truth than I give most people," Nico said quietly. "I'd like to see you again, Elena, if you'll let me." She should have said no. Every practical, sensible part of her mind told her to finish her meal, thank him politely, and go back to her quiet, safe life among the shelves of the library. But there was a pull she could not quite explain, a feeling that whatever Nico Salvatore truly was, the moment they had shared in the rain had been real, unguarded, and true. "All right," she said softly. "I'll see you again." Neither of them could have known, sitting there under the soft golden lights, that this quiet agreement would soon pull them both into a storm, far more dangerous than the one that had brought them together in the first place. 3 weeks passed, and Elena's life began to fold itself around a rhythm she never expected. Dinners with Nico became a quiet, steady thread running through her days, tucked carefully between her library shifts and her evenings at home. He never took her anywhere flashy after that first dinner, as if he had sensed her discomfort with the grandness of it all. Instead, they walked along the river path near her apartment, ate roasted chestnuts from a small cart near the old clock tower, and once spent an entire evening sitting on a bench arguing playfully about which was better, poetry or fiction, until the streetlights flickered on around them. Grace noticed the change immediately. "You're glowing," she said one morning, watching Elena stack returned novels onto a cart with unusual cheerfulness. "It's the mystery man, isn't it? The one from the rain." "His name is Nico," Elena said, unable to hide the small smile tugging at her lips. "And what exactly does Nico do?" Grace asked, folding her arms. "Because a coat like the one you're wearing doesn't come from a man with an ordinary job." Elena hesitated, remembering the vague, careful way Nico had described his family's businesses. "He said it's complicated," she admitted. "Something about inherited responsibilities. He didn't go into detail." Grace's expression shifted from playful curiosity to genuine concern. "Elena, that sounds like exactly the kind of thing you should be worried about, not charmed by." "I know how it sounds," Elena said quietly. "But Grace, you didn't see him that night. Whoever he is now, whatever he does, there was nothing but honesty in him when he had nothing left to hide behind." Grace did not look convinced, but she let the subject drop, the way a good friend does when she can see that words alone will not change someone's mind. Elena appreciated her silence more than she could say, because deep down, she carried the same worry Grace did, quietly, in the back of her thoughts, even as she continued to meet Nico again and again. It was on their 5th meeting, a quiet Sunday afternoon, that Elena finally began to understand the shape of the world Nico moved through. They had gone to a small park on the edge of town, one with an old wooden bridge crossing a narrow stream, far from the busy streets where people might recognize him. Nico had brought a simple lunch, bread, cheese, and fruit, a quiet nod, Elena suspected, to the sandwich she had once shared with him. As they sat on a blanket beneath a wide oak tree, a black car pulled up along the road bordering the park, and a tall man in a dark suit stepped out, walking briskly toward them. Elena felt Nico stiffen slightly beside her, before the man even spoke. "Mr. Salvatore," the man said, his voice low and urgent, "we need to talk now." Nico glanced at Elena, an apology already forming in his eyes. "Give me a moment," he said to her gently, then rose and walked several paces away with the man, their voices dropping too low for her to make out the words. Elena watched carefully, noting the tense set of Nico's shoulders, the sharp, clipped way he spoke, so different from the calm, warm man she had come to know over these past weeks. When he returned, his face had hardened slightly, the softness she had grown used to, replaced by something more guarded. "I'm sorry," he said, sitting back down. "Business matters. I have to take care of something this afternoon." "Is everything all right?" Elena asked carefully. "It will be," Nico said, though his tone lacked its usual confidence. "Elena, there's something I think it's time you understood more clearly, if you're going to keep spending time with me." She waited, watching him gather his thoughts. My family runs several businesses across the city, he began slowly. Some of them are ordinary, restaurants, shipping companies, real estate. Others are older, more complicated. My father built an organization many years ago, one built on loyalty, respect, and unfortunately, sometimes fear. When he passed, that responsibility came to me, whether I wanted it or not. Are you saying you're part of? Elena hesitated, unable to bring herself to say the word out loud, as if speaking it would make it undeniably true. Yes, Nico said quietly, meeting her eyes without flinching. People call my family many things: powerful, dangerous, feared. Some of those things are true, Elena, and I won't insult you by pretending otherwise. The revelation settled over her like a heavy blanket, both suffocating and strangely clarifying at once. She had suspected as much for weeks, ever since that first dinner, ever since she had noticed the way people around him seemed to shrink slightly, the way waiters rushed just a little faster to fill his glass. But hearing him say it plainly, without excuses, without softening the truth, struck her in a way she had not expected. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. "Because I care about you," Nico said simply. "And because you deserve to make your choices with open eyes, not blind ones. If you want to walk away, Elena, I will understand completely. I won't follow you, and I won't punish you for it. But if you choose to stay, I need you to understand exactly what that means." Elena sat in silence for a long moment, staring out at the narrow stream winding beneath the old wooden bridge, the golden afternoon light glinting off the shallow water. Every rational part of her mind screamed that she should stand up, thank him for his honesty, and walk away from whatever dangerous world he represented. She had built a quiet, careful life for herself, one centered around books, and small kindnesses, and simple joys. A man like Nico, with all his hidden power and hidden dangers, threatened to upend everything she had worked so hard to protect. And yet, when she looked at him, she did not see the feared man that strangers whispered about. She saw the shivering figure on the library steps, grateful for half a sandwich. She saw the quiet, thoughtful man who remembered every small detail she mentioned in passing, who brought her chestnuts because she'd once mentioned loving them as a child, who listened more than he spoke. "I'm scared," she admitted finally. "Not of you exactly, but of everything around you, everything I don't understand." "That's fair," Nico said. "I would be more worried if you weren't scared at all. But I don't want to walk away," she continued, surprising herself with the certainty in her own voice. "Not yet. Not when everything I've seen of you has only shown kindness, even if the world around you shows something else." Relief flickered across Nico's face, quickly smoothed over by his usual composure, but Elena caught it, the brief unguarded moment of gratitude. "Then I promise you this," he said. "I will do everything in my power to keep the darker parts of my world away from you. You will never have to see the things that happen in the shadows. I will protect you from all of it." It was a promise made with the best of intentions, spoken in the golden light of a quiet Sunday afternoon, beneath the branches of an old oak tree. Neither of them could have known how quickly that promise would be tested, how the shadows Nico spoke of had a way of reaching even the people he tried hardest to shield. Over the following 2 weeks, Elena noticed subtle changes in the way Nico carried himself. He became more careful about where they met, favoring quiet, out-of-the-way places over public restaurants. He began arriving with a driver named Daniel Ortiz, a broad-shouldered, watchful man who said little but seemed to notice everything, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings even during their most peaceful moments together. "Is Daniel always with you now?" Elena asked one evening, as they walked along a quiet street near her apartment, Daniel trailing a respectful distance behind them. "For now, yes," Nico said. "There have been tensions within the business. I'd rather be careful than sorry." "What kind of tensions?" Nico was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "There's another family, the Marinos, who have wanted a larger share of certain territories for a long time. My father kept them in check through respect and old agreements. Some of them believe those agreements no longer need to be honored, now that I'm the one in charge." "Are you in danger?" Elena asked, unable to keep the worry from creeping into her voice. "I'm always in some danger," Nico admitted. "It's the nature of the life I was born into. But I promise you, Elena, I am careful. I am prepared. This is not something new to me." His words were meant to reassure her, and for a while, they did. She continued seeing him, continued falling deeper into the quiet, steady comfort of his company, even as the small signs of danger multiplied around the edges of their relationship. Daniel's presence became a constant. Nico's phone rang more frequently, pulling him away mid-conversation, his expression tightening every time he stepped away to answer. Grace grew increasingly concerned as the weeks passed, watching Elena's happiness intertwine with a visible undercurrent of worry that had not been there before. "You've changed," Grace observed one afternoon, as they organized a new shipment of books together. "You used to talk about him like he was the best thing that ever happened to you. Now you look over your shoulder sometimes, like you're waiting for something bad to happen." "Maybe I am," Elena admitted quietly. "I don't fully understand his world, Grace. But I understand enough to know it isn't safe. Not completely." "Then why stay?" Elena thought about the question carefully, turning it over in her mind the way she often turned over difficult passages in the books she loved. "Because for the first time in a long time," she said slowly, "someone sees me, truly sees me, not despite my flaws but because of the kindness they think those flaws represent. He makes me feel important, Grace, and I know that's not always a good enough reason to ignore danger. But it's the truth." Grace squeezed her hand gently, worry still etched across her face, but she said nothing more, understanding that Elena's heart had already made its choice, long before her mind had finished weighing the risks. It was on a quiet Thursday evening, nearly 6 weeks after their first dinner together, that the fragile peace Nico had worked so hard to build around Elena's life began to crack. She was walking home from the library, taking her usual shortcut through the narrow alley behind the old bakery, when a car she did not recognize slowed beside her, its windows tinted dark against the evening light. A man stepped out, tall and unfamiliar, his expression carefully blank in a way that made the hair on the back of Elena's neck rise instantly. "You're the librarian," he said, his voice flat and cold. "The one Salvatore's been spending time with." Elena's heart pounded hard against her ribs, every instinct screaming at her to run, though her feet remained frozen in place. "Who are you?" she managed to ask. "Doesn't matter," the man said. "Just wanted to see the woman causing so much fuss. Tell your friend Nico that the Marino family sends their regards. Tell him some things are better left untouched." Before Elena could respond, the man stepped back into the car, and it pulled away quickly, disappearing around the corner of the alley, leaving her standing alone in the fading evening light, her hands trembling, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. For the first time since she had met Nico Salvatore, the danger surrounding him had stopped being an abstract idea whispered about in careful, vague terms. It had found her directly, standing in the very alley she walked through every single day, and it had spoken her fears into terrifying, undeniable reality. Elena did not remember the walk home that evening. One moment she was standing frozen in the alley behind the bakery, and the next she was fumbling with her apartment key, her hands shaking so badly it took 3 attempts to fit it into the lock. Once inside, she sat on the edge of her bed and called Nico, her voice barely steady as she recounted what had happened, the stranger's cold eyes, the mention of the Marino family, the quiet, chilling threat wrapped inside words that sounded almost polite. Nico arrived at her apartment within 20 minutes, Daniel close behind him, both men wearing expressions far more serious than Elena had ever seen on either of them. Nico knelt in front of her where she sat on the small couch, taking her trembling hands in his. "Tell me exactly what he said," Nico said, his voice steady but tight with restrained anger. "Every word, Elena. It's important." She repeated the conversation as best she could remember it, watching Nico's jaw tighten with every sentence. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring at some point past her shoulder, his mind clearly working through calculations she could not follow. "I'm sorry," he said finally, meeting her eyes again. "I promised you I would keep this away from you, and I failed." "What does it mean?" Elena asked. "The Marino family. What do they want?" "They want to send a message," Nico said. "To me, through you. It's an old tactic, showing they can reach the people I care about, proving they're not afraid of the consequences." His expression darkened. "It's meant to frighten me into weakness." into giving up territory, respect, control. Will it work? Elena asked quietly. No, Nico said firmly, but it means I need to take precautions immediately. Daniel will be with you at all times, starting tonight, whether you're at the library, walking home, anywhere. I won't take chances with your safety. Elena wanted to protest, wanted to insist she could take care of herself, but the memory of the stranger's cold, flat voice silenced any argument before it could form. She nodded instead, grateful, despite herself, for the protection Nico was offering. Over the following days, life took on a strange, tense rhythm. Daniel became a quiet, constant presence, waiting outside the library during her shifts, walking a respectful distance behind her on her way home, always watchful, always alert. Grace noticed immediately, her concern deepening with every passing day. This is what I was afraid of, Grace said one afternoon, watching Daniel through the library's front window, standing patiently near the entrance. Elena, this isn't a life. Constant guards, constant fear, constant looking over your shoulder. I know, Elena admitted. But what choice do I have now? I can't undo the fact that I care about him, Grace. And running away doesn't guarantee my safety either, not now that they know who I am. Grace had no response to that, because deep down, she understood Elena was right. The threat had already been made. Walking away from Nico would not erase the danger. It would only remove the one person capable of protecting her from it. Nico, for his part, threw himself into managing the growing tension with the Marino family, spending long hours in meetings Elena was never invited to, his phone constantly buzzing with updates from various corners of his organization. He tried to shield her from the details, but small fragments slipped through anyway, hints of negotiations gone wrong, warnings exchanged between old rivals, a careful balance of power teetering on the edge of collapse. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after the incident in the alley, Nico arrived at Elena's apartment later than usual, his expression more exhausted and strained than she had ever seen it. What happened? She asked immediately, setting aside the book she had been trying, unsuccessfully, to focus on. The Marinos made another move today, Nico said, sinking into the chair across from her. They damaged one of our shipping warehouses. No one was hurt, thankfully. But the message was clear. They're not backing down. What are you going to do? Elena asked. What I have to, Nico said simply. Protect what's mine. Protect the people who depend on me for their livelihoods. And protect you. He paused, studying her carefully. Elena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. All right. Do you regret this? Being with me, knowing everything you know now. Elena considered the question seriously, thinking of the fear she had felt in the alley, the constant presence of Daniel now shadowing her every move, the strain visible in Nico's face each time he returned from another tense negotiation. It would have been easy, in that moment, to say yes, to admit that the danger had grown too large, too real, too close. But when she looked at Nico, exhausted and worried not for himself, but for her safety, she found she could not bring herself to regret any of it. No, she said finally, I don't regret it. I'm scared, Nico. I won't pretend otherwise, but I don't regret choosing to stay. Something in Nico's expression softened, relief and gratitude mixing together in his tired eyes. You are stronger than you know, Elena Marsh, he said quietly, stronger than most people who have lived in this world their entire lives. Their conversation was interrupted by the sharp buzz of Nico's phone. He answered quickly, his expression shifting from tenderness to sharp focus within seconds. Elena watched as he listened intently, his knuckles whitening slightly around the phone. I have to go, he said, standing abruptly once the call ended. There's a situation developing. Daniel will stay here with you until I return. What kind of situation? Elena asked, alarm rising in her chest. Nothing you need to worry about, Nico said, though his tense expression betrayed the reassurance in his words. He pressed a quick, gentle kiss to her forehead, before hurrying out the door, leaving Elena alone with Daniel, and a growing sense of unease that settled deep in her stomach. 2 hours passed in tense silence, Elena pacing her small apartment, while Daniel remained a steady, watchful presence near the door. When her phone finally rang, she answered immediately. relief flooding through her at the sound of Nico's voice, though it was clear from his tone that something had gone wrong. "I need you to listen carefully," Nico said, his voice tight with urgency. "The situation with the Marinos has escalated further than I anticipated. It's not safe for you to stay in your apartment tonight. Daniel is going to bring you somewhere secure." "Nico, you're scaring me," Elena said, her voice trembling slightly. "I know," Nico said, his voice softening slightly despite the urgency underlying his words. "And I'm sorry for that. But I need you to trust me, Elena. Please, go with Daniel. I'll explain everything once I know you're safe." Elena had no choice but to trust him. She gathered a few essential belongings quickly, her hands shaking as she packed a small bag, before following Daniel out to the waiting car. They drove in tense silence through the quiet streets, Daniel's eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror, checking for any sign that they were being followed. They arrived at a large, unfamiliar house on the outskirts of town, tucked behind tall iron gates and surrounded by carefully manicured gardens that seemed strangely out of place given the tense circumstances of their arrival. Nico met her at the door, his expression a mixture of relief and lingering worry. "You're safe here," he said, pulling her gently into an embrace. "This house belongs to my family. It's secure, private. No one outside my closest circle knows its location." "What happened tonight, Nico?" Elena asked, pulling back slightly to search his face for answers. "Please, don't shield me from this any longer. I need to understand." Nico sighed, running a tired hand through his hair before finally nodding. "The Marinos attempted to intercept one of our shipments tonight. It turned into a confrontation. No one was seriously hurt, but it's clear now that they intend to escalate this conflict far beyond simple warnings and property damage." "Are you in danger?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We are all in danger, to some degree," Nico admitted. "But I promise you, Elena, I will do everything within my power to resolve this before it grows any worse. I have people working on a peaceful resolution, old channels of communication that have worked before." "And if that doesn't work?" Nico's silence answered the question more clearly than words ever could. Over the following days, Elena remained at the secluded estate, growing gradually more familiar with the quiet, careful world Nico inhabited. She met a few of his closest associates, careful, watchful men and women, who treated her with polite distance, clearly uncertain how to categorize the librarian, who had somehow become important enough to Nico Salvatore that he had moved her into his family's private estate for her own protection. She spent her days reading in the estate's surprisingly extensive library, a quiet, comforting reminder of the life she had left behind, and her evenings with Nico, when his schedule allowed, discussing everything from old poetry to his careful, calculated plans to resolve the growing conflict with the Marino family without further violence. It was during one such evening, nearly a week into her stay at the estate, that Elena finally worked up the courage to ask the question that had been weighing on her mind since the beginning of their relationship. "Nico," she said quietly, as they sat together on the estate's quiet back porch, overlooking the moonlit gardens. "Do you ever wish for a different life? One without all of this constant danger, constant tension?" Nico considered the question carefully, his gaze drifting out toward the dark shapes of the garden hedges. "Every single day," he admitted finally. "This life was never something I chose, Elena. It was given to me, inherited, along with all its responsibilities and dangers. There are moments, more and more often lately, when I wonder what it might be like to simply walk away from all of it." "Could you?" Elena asked carefully. "Walk away, I mean?" "It's complicated," Nico said. "There are people who depend on me, employees, families connected to this business in ways that go far beyond simple loyalty. Walking away isn't as simple as closing a door and never looking back." "But is it possible?" Elena pressed gently. Nico turned to look at her fully, something vulnerable flickering behind his usually guarded eyes. "With the right reasons," he said quietly, "I believe almost anything is possible." Elena did not respond immediately, letting his words settle between them in the quiet moonlight. She understood, without needing further explanation, that Nico was speaking about her, about the possibility of a future built around something other than fear and inherited responsibility. It was a fragile, hopeful thought, one she allowed herself to hold on to carefully, even as she remained fully aware of the very real danger still surrounding them both. The following morning, that fragile hope was tested more severely than either of them could have anticipated. Elena woke to the sound of raised voices echoing from somewhere downstairs in the estate, sharp and urgent in a way that immediately set her nerves on edge. She dressed quickly and hurried down the wide staircase, following the sound to the estate study, where she found Nico standing behind his desk. Daniel and two other men she did not recognize gathered around him, all wearing expressions of grim concern. "What's happening?" Elena asked from the doorway, unable to keep the worry from her voice. Nico looked up, and for a brief moment, something like relief crossed his face at the sight of her, quickly replaced by careful composure. "Come in," he said. "You should hear this too, since it concerns your safety directly." Elena stepped into the study, standing close beside Nico as he continued addressing the men gathered around him. "The Merinos have grown bolder," he said grimly. "Overnight, they attempted to locate this estate. Fortunately, our security measures held, and they were unable to determine its exact location. But it's clear now that their patience has run out." "What does that mean?" Elena asked. "It means," Daniel answered gravely, "that they're prepared to take more drastic action to force Nico into giving up territory and control, possibly targeting people connected to him directly." Elena's stomach twisted painfully at the implication. "Including me," she said quietly. "Especially you," Nico admitted, his jaw tight with barely restrained anger, "which is why I need to make some difficult decisions very quickly." Over the following hour, Elena listened as Nico and his closest associates discussed various strategies, careful negotiations, potential alliances with other families who might help balance the growing threat from the Merinos, quiet shows of strength, meant to discourage further escalation without resorting to open conflict. She understood only fragments of the careful, coded language they used, but she understood enough to recognize the seriousness of the situation unfolding around her. Later that afternoon, once the meeting had concluded and the other men had left, Nico found Elena sitting quietly in the estate's garden, staring out at the carefully trimmed hedges without truly seeing them. "I need to tell you something," he said, sitting down beside her on the stone bench, "and I need you to listen carefully before you respond." Elena turned to face him, bracing herself for whatever difficult news he was about to share. "I've arranged for you to stay somewhere safer," Nico continued. "A property far outside the city, somewhere the Merinos would never think to look. It means being away from your job, your friends, everything familiar, for a while. But it's the safest option I can offer you right now." "For how long?" Elena asked. "I don't know," Nico admitted honestly. "Until this situation resolves itself, one way or another." Elena sat with the weight of his words for a long moment, thinking of Grace, of the library, of the small, quiet life she had built for herself before that rainy night, when she had shared her sandwich with a stranger. Everything about her old life suddenly felt impossibly distant, separated from her, not just by physical distance, but by the vast gulf of danger and secrecy that now defined her days. "And what about you?" she asked finally. "Will you be safe?" "I'll be careful," Nico said, though the answer felt incomplete, deliberately vague in a way that worried her more than any direct admission of danger could have. "Nico," Elena said firmly, "I need you to be honest with me. Completely honest. What exactly are you planning to do?" Nico studied her for a long moment, clearly weighing how much to reveal. Finally he sighed, running a tired hand across his face. "I'm planning to meet with the head of the Merino family directly," he admitted, "to negotiate a resolution before this conflict grows any further out of control." "Isn't that dangerous?" Elena asked, alarm rising sharply in her chest. "Extremely," Nico admitted. "But it's necessary. The alternative is a prolonged conflict that could cost far more, in every sense of the word, than a single dangerous meeting." "Then I'm coming with you," Elena said suddenly, surprising herself with the sudden certainty in her own voice. "Absolutely not," Nico said immediately, his tone sharp with protective urgency. "Elena, this is exactly the kind of danger I've been trying to keep you away from." "And I understand that," Elena said, standing to face him directly. "But hiding away somewhere safe while you walk into danger alone isn't something I can simply accept, Nico. Not after everything we've shared. Their argument continued for nearly an hour, tense and emotional. Nico insisting on her safety above all else. Elena refusing to be shielded entirely from the danger that had already reshaped both their lives so completely. In the end, they reached a careful compromise. Elena would remain nearby, at a secure location just outside the meeting site, while Nico and Daniel proceeded with the negotiation, with additional guards positioned discreetly to ensure both their safety. The night before the scheduled meeting, Elena lay awake in the unfamiliar bedroom of the estate, staring at the ceiling, while her mind raced through every possible outcome of the following day. Nico had explained, as gently as possible, the significance of the meeting, how it represented a genuine attempt to establish a lasting peace between the two families, an old tradition of careful, respectful negotiation meant to avoid the kind of prolonged, destructive conflict that had crippled other criminal organizations in the past. If this works, Nico had said quietly, holding her hand as they sat together in the quiet darkness, it could mean an end to this constant danger, a chance for both of us to build something more stable, more peaceful. And if it doesn't work? Elena had asked. Nico had not answered that question directly, and his silence had told her everything she needed to know about the risks involved. The morning of the meeting arrived cold and overcast, matching perfectly the tense atmosphere that had settled over the entire estate. Elena watched from the window of the car as Daniel drove them toward the meeting location, a neutral, carefully chosen restaurant on the outskirts of the city, selected specifically for its accessibility and the ease with which both parties could ensure their own safety. "Remember," Nico said, turning to Elena before stepping out of the car, "stay here, with the other guards. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, stay in this car until Daniel comes to get you." "Please be careful," Elena said, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to remain composed. Nico leaned forward, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I intend to be," he said quietly, before stepping out of the car and disappearing into the restaurant, flanked by two of his most trusted men. The following 40 minutes stretched into what felt like hours, Elena sitting tensely in the back of the car, watching the restaurant's quiet exterior for any sign of what might be happening inside. The guards positioned around the car remained alert and watchful, occasionally exchanging quiet updates through small earpieces, though none of the information seemed to reach Elena directly. Just as the tension had grown almost unbearable, Elena noticed a second car pulling up sharply across the street, several men stepping out quickly, their movements sharp and purposeful in a way that immediately set off alarm bells in her mind. "Something's wrong," she said urgently to the guard sitting beside her in the car. "Those men, they don't look like they're here for the meeting." The guard's expression tightened as he studied the men across the street, quickly reaching for his radio to alert the others. Before he could finish relaying the warning, the restaurant's front doors burst open, and Nico emerged quickly, his expression sharp with alarm, Daniel close behind him, both men moving with the practiced urgency of people who had trained extensively for exactly this kind of dangerous situation. "Get her out of here," Nico shouted toward the car, even as the strange men from across the street began moving quickly toward the restaurant entrance. Elena's heart pounded furiously as the guard beside her started the car, preparing to pull away immediately, but she could not tear her eyes away from Nico, standing exposed and vulnerable in the open street, clearly caught between protecting himself and ensuring her safety first. "Nico," she called out, rolling down the window despite the guard's protests. For a brief, terrifying moment, their eyes met across the chaotic scene, and Elena saw something in his expression she had never seen before. Genuine fear, not for himself, but entirely for her. "Go, Elena!" he shouted urgently. "Now!" The car lurched forward sharply, pulling away from the restaurant just as the strange men reached the entrance, their intentions unclear but undeniably threatening. Elena twisted in her seat, watching desperately as the restaurant grew smaller in the distance, praying silently that Nico would somehow emerge from whatever danger was unfolding behind her, safe and unharmed. The following hours passed in an agonizing blur of uncertainty, Elena taken to another secure location, while Daniel remained behind, coordinating with the other guards to assess the situation and ensure Nico's safety. When Daniel finally arrived to update her, his expression grim but steady. Relief flooded through Elena's chest at his simple, reassuring words. "Nico is safe," Daniel said. "The situation has been contained. But Elena, I need you to understand something important. This conflict just became significantly more dangerous. Whatever happens next, you need to be prepared for difficult decisions ahead." Elena absorbed his words carefully, understanding without needing further explanation that whatever peace Nico had hoped to negotiate had likely collapsed entirely, replaced instead by an even more urgent and dangerous confrontation between two powerful, dangerous families, one of whom she now found herself inseparably connected to, for better or worse. That evening, when Nico finally returned to her, exhausted and visibly shaken despite his attempts to appear composed, Elena embraced him tightly, relief and lingering fear mixing together in equal measure. "What happened?" she asked quietly, once they were finally alone. "The meeting was a trap," Nico admitted, his voice heavy with exhaustion and barely restrained anger. "The Marinos never intended a peaceful resolution. They intended to eliminate the threat I represent entirely. Are you safe now?" Elena asked, searching his face carefully for any sign of injury she might have missed. "For tonight, yes," Nico said. "But Elena, I need to be honest with you. This conflict isn't going to resolve itself peacefully. Not anymore. I need to make some very difficult decisions in the coming days. Decisions that will determine not just my future, but yours as well." Elena held his hand tightly, bracing herself for whatever difficult path lay ahead, understanding fully now that the quiet, simple life she had once known, filled with books and small kindnesses and gentle routines, had irrevocably changed the moment she had chosen to share her last sandwich with a stranger in the rain. In the days following the failed meeting, Nico withdrew into a quiet, focused intensity that Elena had never witnessed before. He spent hours locked away in the estate's study with Daniel and his other closest advisors, emerging only briefly for meals he barely touched, his mind clearly consumed by the weight of decisions that would shape the future of everyone connected to him. Elena tried to give him space, understanding the enormous pressure he carried, but the growing distance between them left her feeling increasingly isolated within the walls of the unfamiliar estate. She missed the library desperately, the quiet comfort of shelving books and helping curious visitors find their next favorite story. She missed Grace's easy laughter and honest concern. Most of all, she missed the simple, uncomplicated version of her life that had existed before that rainy night on the library steps. One evening, nearly 4 days after the failed meeting, Elena finally found the courage to approach Nico directly, finding him alone in the study, staring at a map spread across his desk, marked with small notations she did not fully understand. "Nico," she said gently, closing the door behind her. "Talk to me, please. I can't keep watching you disappear into this without understanding what's happening." Nico looked up, exhaustion evident in the dark circles beneath his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I've been trying to protect you from the details, but perhaps that's been the wrong approach all along." "What have you decided?" Elena asked, sitting down across from him. Nico was quiet for a long moment before finally speaking. "The Marinos have made it clear they intend to escalate this conflict as far as necessary to take control of territories my family has held for decades. Continuing negotiations, after their betrayal at the restaurant, would be foolish, dangerous, even. So I've made a difficult decision." "Which is?" "I'm going to step back," Nico said, the words seeming to cost him great effort. "Transfer control of the more dangerous aspects of the business to trusted associates who have long wanted greater responsibility. Retain only the legitimate businesses, the restaurants, the shipping companies, the real estate. Let go of everything that has made my family a target for conflicts like this one." Elena stared at him, stunned by the magnitude of what he was describing. "Is that even possible?" she asked. "Walking away from something like this?" "It won't be easy," Nico admitted. "There will be those who see it as weakness, an invitation for further attacks. But I've spoken with my most trusted advisors, and we believe it's the only path that offers any real chance at lasting peace, both for the business and for the people connected to it." "What does this mean for the Marinos?" Elena asked carefully. "It means removing the reason for conflict entirely," Nico said. Without the territories they've been fighting to claim, there's nothing left to fight over. It's a significant loss, financially and in terms of influence, but it's a loss I'm prepared to accept. And for us? Elena asked quietly. What does it mean for us? Nico reached across the desk, taking her hand gently in his. It means, he said, his voice softening with something like genuine hope, that for the first time since I inherited this responsibility, I might finally have the chance to build a life that isn't defined entirely by danger and inherited obligation. A life where I could imagine a future with you, Elena, without constantly fearing for your safety. Elena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of his words, by the sacrifice he was clearly prepared to make. Are you certain this is what you want? She asked. Not just for me, but for yourself? I've never been more certain of anything, Nico said firmly. This life was given to me, Elena, not chosen. For a long time, I believed I had no other option but to accept it fully, dangers and all. But meeting you, seeing the simple, genuine kindness you offered a stranger, with nothing to give in return, it reminded me that there are better ways to live, better things worth protecting than power and territory. The following weeks brought significant, careful changes as Nico began the delicate process of transferring control of his family's more dangerous enterprises to trusted associates, while formally reaching out to the Marino family through careful, neutral intermediaries to negotiate the terms of his withdrawal from contested territories. It was a slow, cautious process, filled with tense negotiations and moments of uncertainty, but gradually, the constant threat of violence began to recede. Daniel remained close throughout the transition, though his role gradually shifted from constant bodyguard to trusted friend and advisor, helping Nico navigate the complicated process of legitimizing the family's remaining businesses fully. You're doing the right thing, Daniel told Nico one evening, as they reviewed the final documents transferring control of the family's more dangerous operations. Your father would understand, even if some of the old guard doesn't. I hope so, Nico said quietly. I owe it to Elena to build something better than what I inherited. Meanwhile, Elena slowly began reconnecting with her old life, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence, as the danger surrounding Nico gradually diminished. She returned to her shifts at the library, Grace greeting her with a fierce, relieved embrace the moment she walked through the doors. I was so worried, Grace admitted, holding Elena at arm's length to study her carefully. You disappeared for weeks. I didn't know what to think. I'm sorry, Elena said, guilt washing over her at the worry she had clearly caused her closest friend. It's a long story, Grace, but I promise, things are going to be different now. Better. Over the following months, Elena watched as Nico slowly transformed the remaining aspects of his family's business into something entirely legitimate, expanding the restaurants and shipping companies into respected, thriving enterprises that provided honest work for hundreds of employees across the city. The transformation was not without its challenges. Occasional resistance from those within the old organization who resented the loss of power and influence, careful negotiations with local authorities eager to ensure the legitimacy of the newly restructured businesses, lingering tension with remnants of the Marino family, who took time to fully trust the sincerity of Nico's withdrawal from contested territories. But gradually, steadily, peace began to settle over both their lives. It was nearly 8 months after that rainy night on the library steps, when Nico returned to the same spot, waiting patiently as Elena finished locking up the library for the evening. The rain had returned that night as well, though lighter this time, a gentle mist rather than the harsh downpour that had first brought them together. You know, Elena said, smiling as she noticed him waiting, this is becoming quite the habit of yours. Some habits are worth keeping, Nico said, smiling back at her, especially the ones that lead to the best things in life. He reached into his coat pocket, producing a small velvet box that immediately caught Elena's attention, her breath catching in her throat as understanding dawned. Elena Marsh, Nico said, opening the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring. 8 months ago, you shared the last thing you had with a stranger who had nothing left to give in return. That single act of kindness changed the entire course of my life, showed me a version of myself I had almost forgotten existed beneath all the responsibility and danger I had inherited. I've spent every day since then trying to become worthy of the kindness you showed me that night." Tears streamed freely down Elena's cheeks as she listened, overwhelmed by the weight and sincerity of his words. "I love you," Nico continued, "not because of anything you have or anything you've done, but simply because of who you are, the genuine, generous heart that saw a stranger in need and offered everything you had without hesitation. Will you marry me, Elena? Will you build the rest of this life with me, whatever shape it takes?" Elena knelt down slightly to meet his eyes more directly, her hands trembling with emotion as she nodded, unable to find words adequate enough to express the depth of her feelings. "Yes," she finally managed, laughing through her tears. "Yes, Nico, of course I'll marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, the gentle mist continued falling around them, echoing softly the rain that had first brought two strangers together on a quiet library step, one with everything to give despite having so little, and one with everything to gain, despite believing he had nothing left worth saving. Their story, born from a single, selfless act of kindness, had become something neither of them could have imagined that rainy night, a testament to the profound, transformative power of simple generosity, and proof that even the most feared and guarded hearts could be softened by genuine compassion. In the years that followed, Elena continued working at the library she loved, eventually becoming its head librarian, expanding its programs and resources with the same quiet generosity that had first captured Nico's heart. Nico, meanwhile, built his family's legitimate businesses into a respected pillar of the community, quietly funding scholarships and community programs, always remembering the simple sandwich that had once meant the difference between hunger and hope during the darkest night of his life. Grace often teased them both, recalling how skeptical she had been of the mysterious stranger who had swept her closest friend into an unexpected romance. "I still can't believe it started with half a sandwich," she would say, shaking her head with fond amusement whenever the story came up among friends. "It's amazing," Elena would always reply, smiling warmly at Nico across whatever room they happened to be in, "what a small act of kindness can grow into, when given freely, without expectation of anything in return." And so their story became a quiet legend among those who knew them, a gentle reminder that even in a world filled with fear and uncertainty, genuine kindness retains the power to transform lives completely, turning strangers into soulmates, and turning the darkest, most feared corners of the world into something worth believing in again.